You know what's funny? I'm always meant to change that audio clip, but I actually always liked it too because purple's been my color, and I don't know if you recognize it, but that was the Barney theme, which is
Oh, okay. No, I do not recognize that.
yeah, it's kind of on brand for my week anyway.
Huh.
Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025. I'm here with David. I presume it's kind of pronounced Khan.
Gone.
I've never
Yeah,
actually pronounced it like Khan, like Star Trek kind of. Yeah.
there you go.
And yeah, before we get going, I stumbled across your stuff about a year ago, I would say, maybe 11 months. Just always, I mean, definitely in the human design world and other stuff. A lot of the explanations that you had for things I really enjoyed at the time. And then I kind of went down a whole other path. And then you kind of reappeared on my radar maybe 2 months ago. And I think we connected about a month ago. You had moved into, I'll call it my area only because I've been here for the last 25 years. So it's but first you were in Souk and now you're on Salt Spring Island.
That's right.
Um, and the number of people in the last 2 weeks that I know are on Salt Spring or seem to be going there, which is interesting. I don't know if actually, I don't know how true this is, uh, but I think Salt Spring was where a whole bunch of draft dodgers went way back when. Like it was kind of like,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because there's a couple little places. Nelson was one of those. Salt Spring
yeah,
as well. Yeah.
yeah. So, which it's kind of probably happening all over again. Maybe not dodging a draft, but just getting the heck out of Dodge. So,
Yeah.
why don't you introduce yourself? Talk a little bit of, tell us a little bit about what you do, what makes you tick, and then we can go from there. I would be curious to hear about your choice to choose Salt Spring because I do recall you talking about moving to Souk and that felt like home, and then before I knew it, you had moved it again. So I just was curious about how that even played out. But
Yeah, sure.
let her rip, man.
I guess the best thing to describe myself as is that's always a tricky one because I do so many things under a constant umbrella, and that umbrella is to help guide humanity along a sort of evolutionary arc. And so I'm going to use whatever's in the current cultural milieu to do that, and to tune people out of the distraction, the distortions, and the part of life that is here to predate on them and manipulate them into basically a dead end, and to help them actually make this evolutionary jump. It should be no secret to anyone at this point in time that things are changing out there, and that many of the scientific rationalist principles that we've grown up on, or Christian principles, are falling apart and they're not explaining what's going on. And we're being led more into a realm of spirituality, where our scientific models are entering into quantum physics, is starting to make a lot more sense. Theoretical physicians are bridging the gap. And so I would describe myself as a deep generalist, or somebody who kind of puts together a holistic model and goes deep into all these little nodes to show the interconnectedness of what life could look like. I've rebuilt my own human design system called Trifecta, and I do a sort of energy work to help people balance on all of their bodies. I've created a system for looking at what the background frequency is at a different point in time. I've just been a personality on YouTube as well, like, doing stuff. So very used to talking, very used to sharing ideas with people. Some of it's not received well at all, and other stuff really seems to be groovy with people. So I guess that's my introduction.
Okay. Um, I've been referring to myself quite a bit as like a citizen scientist because I'm not a science background. I've definitely stumbled. I mean, stumbled onto this path entirely. Is that it? Would
Mhm.
you describe yourself as something similar? Like you've always just been an
No,
experiment?
my father was a nuclear physicist, and I'm a trained engineer, so I actually have worked in the scientific field.
Okay.
So I'm not a citizen scientist, I'm an actual scientist. My mentor had a PhD in quantum mechanics and electrical engineering. So, needless to say, um, my process is scientific, but I have a huge respect for citizen scientists because one thing I have noticed working with a lot of scientists is that they get into a particular box. And the thing about science isn't just this one, truth datum that people think it is. but we create models, right? And so certain models basically take the chaos of life and order it. And some models are better for specific areas of life, and other models are better for other areas of life. But the thing is, the universe is infinite, and there's no such thing as an infinitely recalibrating model that can actually keep up with the rate of change out there. So we actually need to shift models quite regularly in order for us to accurately describe the things that we're seeing.
Hmm. Interesting. Um, I'll just tell you exactly what came to my mind as you were saying that,
Mhm.
and this is completely sort of off topic, but I read or heard somewhere something recently which was suggested that the CIA and those various folks like that have been doing remote viewing forever, but recently the remote viewing life is happening too fast that they can't use it in a strategic or manipulative way. That just popped back in my head based on what you said. So I don't know if there's any merit to that other than the idea that they were doing effectively forecasting and manipulation, and things are happening. Timelines are shifting too fast that it's proven to be ineffective and disruptive even to that group.
Yeah, so my mentor is actually part of the Stargate project back in the 60s and 70s. It was actually called something else there, and it was actually a different department of the CIA. And so he learned the best techniques for this. You know, he was actually before Joe McMoneagle and who was the other guy, Ingo Swann, and some of these remote viewers that are quite famous that worked for the CIA. And a lot of them were trained at the Monroe Institute. My mentor just happened to possess these skills innately. So I got a glance in there, and I've actually known several people who've worked for police departments who've been trained facilitators at the Monroe Institute. And so there was this model that was working 60s, 70s, and early 80s. And then after that, they stopped investing in it because the accuracy levels were declining.
Mm.
And this may be alluding to what you were saying because they have to maintain 80% accuracy. Otherwise, it's not considered a viable method for intelligence gathering.
Mhm.
And of course, nowadays, you know, I'm just plugged into timelines in the collective. I'm a reflector in human design. So for me, it's very easy. And when you're a reflector and sort of open to a degree, you can just data stream. Like I could just focus on something and start data streaming from that thing, which is quite an interesting thing. And I, you know, the next step is how much of it can I verify? Because the question always is, and when you're trained, it's how much of this is emotional baggage that's influencing your perception, right? Because a lot of everyone on the internet now says, "I'm a psychic. You know, I'm spiritual. I'm intuitive," but like they're just garbage is pouring out of their mouth half the time, or what they write in their predictions, because they don't realize that their emotions get in the way and they distort their predictions. So you have to actually be able to remove that buffer that's caused by the emotions in order to see clearly. This is also why the Russians outperformed the Americans in remote viewing in the 60s and 70s, is because the Russians, their culture doesn't have the same relationship to emotions that we do
Mm.
in North America. Their culture is cold, you know, like the Russian, like they just focus. It is about the job, you know, whereas we have our associations and, you know, especially here, you know, I mean, we might not show our emotions. A lot of the time they get repressed, but they still influence us at a subconscious level.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, thanks for even just answering that because it just completely fell into my head. But it's something that I've learned to trust that inside
Yeah, I
knowledge.
got to warn you, I can go anywhere because of that ability to data stream. So, you know, you could bring up most subjects, maybe not like trivia type of subjects or about like specific movies or bands, but like, you know, if we're talking broad enough, I can speak into it with a certain level of intelligence. So we got to be careful that we keep on some sort of track.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. Well, okay. Well, let's. I actually wasn't aware that you were a reflector. But that I mean, I hadn't thought of it in terms of data streaming. Like, and again, I'm fairly new to this whole world, so like the idea of channeling, like, how is channeling different than data streaming, and or would you say it's kind of the same?
No, no, I wouldn't recommend channeling either.
Okay.
for a specific reason. So you have to remember, most people in spirituality, they do not have any idea of what they're doing, what they're actually doing. They get attracted to the fact that, oh, I can work with energy and I feel something and I feel different. Most things that are going to seduce you and ruin you are the things that feel really good at the beginning, and then they eventually decline, you know? I'm thinking it's like, this is a very bad example, but I'm going to use it. It's like, you know, marrying a stripper. You know, it's like, she's beautiful, she's great, she's charming, and then you get in there and she just takes all your money and just moves on to the next guy, and you're left ruined, right? It's sort of like that kind of thing. On this is a very common thing that happens, where we get married to something that appears good. It's the image of what we want, but then when we actually get in there, we get a hit of something, and then it just declines. I mean, that's how cults work. When no one joins a cult because it sucks at the beginning. People join a cult because literally they get love bombed, and they think, my God, I've found the answer to life. And then as they get in, they're deprived of sleep, and they're malnourished, and they're fed the same dogma over and over again. They don't even notice the frog boiling in the pot. And then they're brainwashed, and then they don't know how to get out. Mm-hmm. And so this, though, is a phenomenon that happens a lot, and channeling is one of these things. Channeling is where you let something else occupy your vessel. On a genetic level, it begins to degenerate your DNA. And so it begins to actually break down your DNA, and you sort of, you have an opening for this other thing to come in. Now, if you've watched some of these channelers that are doing this, they look freaking insane. Like even Bashar, it's just like he goes into this like nuts like thing, and people are like, oh, this is wisdom. I listen to him, and it's like, this is gross. And people are starting to see it now. They're calling him a Muppet and other things like that. It's like, because you don't know what is behind that. You don't know what channel he's plugged into. Mm-hmm. A very famous one was Jay-Z Knight back in the 80s, who used to channel Ramtha, which is an Atlantean war god. And everybody, she was on popular television shows and late night TV, and everyone thought it was cool. And a lot of people just didn't think she was, real. They thought she was making it up. But she would roll her eyes back in her head, and she would come forward with this like, kind of thing. They measured her brain waves. Of course, she's in a different brainwave pattern that's mostly delta frequencies. So, they thought it was interesting, and she's talking about things that the woman had no association with. But the question is that helpful or harmful? Mm-hmm. So data streaming is where you actually lean back beyond your soul into something called an oversoul. And an oversoul is kind of like a shared social memory complex. So it's shared amongst a number of beings that are in your soul family. It's kind of like you lean back into the library of all the things that the other versions of you and other dimensions, realities, or even this world are doing. There's other people I meet. When people talk about soulmates and they have this experience of like, I met this person and like we finished each other's sentences and we were so in love and we knew everything about each other. It's because you are cut from the same cloth. You are literally from the same soul tribe. You're from the same oversoul group. This is not new concept. This is a very ancient concept. Oftentimes when you meet that group of people, that tribe, you're meant to meet them because you're part of like the same mission control in the realm beyond the veil. And so data streaming is when you plug back into your own oversoul and you basically speak the information that's been gathered by the millions of beings that are contributing to that. I don't really want to venture off anywhere else. I don't want to venture off into somebody else's oversoul. That's like kind of walking into somebody's property. It's like trespassing.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay. Akashic Records. Is that effectively...
It's the next level.
It's next
level. Next level above that. I used to train people with the Akashic Records. About 5 years ago, I ran a school. And the Akashic Records, if you read the book, The Holographic Universe, it gives the most concise scientific understanding of it. But basically, at a quantum level, which means very, very, very small, there's a record of everything that's ever happened in the entire universe at that level. So in my thumbnail is all the information of the history of the Andromeda Galaxy. So it's basically a hologram, and a hologram means that you can take the entire universe and you can subdivide it into something that's a quark, and that quark will contain all the other parts of the universe, right? Like if you cut a hologram in half, you get 2 pictures of the thing. You cut it in half again, now you have 4, right? The hologram just keeps subdividing of whatever that image is. And therefore, the Akashic records are the net result of everything. And this is why, people can access information non-locally. Again, are they distorting it with their emotions? A lot of the time they are. There's a
Mhm.
lot of people who claim to read the Akashic records, and when I see what comes out of their mouth, I'm like, I wouldn't go to them for a session.
Mm.
So part of my work is about getting clear.
Yeah. Well, interesting. So when you data stream,
Hmm.
does is the information already familiar to you? You've already had the thought, you know how to put it into words, or it's quite
Nope.
literally
Sometimes
just
it's
pouring
completely
out of
surprising what comes out of my mouth.
you? Well, and so okay, this is again not where I was expecting to go, but like my, my understanding, like channel 4323 is kind of meant to be this freak to genius or knowing without knowledge. That to me sounds like what you're describing. If you're a
Mhm.
reflector, you wouldn't have that channel. Use it from that synthesis, right?
Mhm.
So how did
Well,
you?
the moon would make that channel. The transits of the moon.
Sure, yeah.
As a reflector, I mean, I live 1,000 lives in a single lunar cycle.
Hmm. Well, what's that like? And at what point were you aware of that?
It was 2017 that I figured that out, and I guess um, at that time, because we're all trying to figure out what's the best thing for ourselves, and as a reflector, your environment, and the people that surround you, are the really your best litmus test for health. So I packed up. I was living in Alberta at the time, and I moved to Bali, Indonesia, to be around people who actually matched my ilk, and I got invited into a lot of different projects and operations that were happening at that time because of it. And
Hmm.
so I've always made it a prerogative to live in the right environment. Sometimes I go to some places, and I mean, I hate to say it, but nowadays a lot of North America to me feels like a wasteland.
Mhm.
I mean, driving across the prairies, there's some beautiful parts of the prairies, don't get me wrong, but the prairies of the Midwest, if you're from the US, I mean, it's just like canola field, GMO canola field, cornfield, and it's just like a lot of very regressive ways of thinking in farming and all of that are part and parcel. And you go to the same dusty town, it's got like that one Chinese restaurant that's been there for 50 years, and it's got a gas station, and then everybody there looks miserable. I'm not dissing anybody's hometown, by the way, but I'm just saying
Yeah.
this is sort of the feeling I get. And inside, I feel like death. Like if I had to live there in 2 weeks, I'd probably be dead.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. I've been really checking in it with even with my body and my sense lately. Like there's a physical discomfort now around certain people and certain things that I didn't feel before.
Yeah.
There was a salty, weighty heaviness that blocked that, and
Mm.
lately I'm much more clear, which has its own benefits of being clear. And then also just the sensitivity of being clear and it being new and uncomfortable and disruptive.
Yeah.
So, interesting. So, when you went abroad, um, did you have to hunt these people? Not hunt these people, seek these people out, or did they see in you that you were like? Did they sense that right away, or like how does one
Yeah,
even
just
do
to
that?
show up somewhere, a conversation would start with somebody, or I go to check out a house, and the person living there would be doing something interesting.
Mhm.
One
Hmm.
thing led to another. I'm not really the kind of person that goes out and does a lot of events and that type of thing. I mostly keep to myself. But I still get, the right people showing up through one way or another. Or somebody will say, "Hey, you got to check this person out." I check that person out. I'm like, "Oh my god, this person's like saying the same thing I am." So I'll send them one email, and then they'll respond to me and like, "Yes, like this is totally in alignment. Let's do something." And then a collaboration will form. So that's sort of the organic naturalness, I guess, when you're just being true to yourself.
Hmm. Um, Probably none of my business, but like, do you fly solo? Do you have a family?
Yeah,
Like,
I have
if
a
you're
daughter. Um, yeah, I have a daughter. I have a partner. I mean, I do have a family. as
Yeah.
well, which
Well,
is
no,
actually challenging. It's actually I do find it challenging because as a reflector, I want a lot of alone time.
yeah. Well, and it just sounds like you're able to be a bit of a nomad. So you've got a supportive unit that's going with you.
Oh yeah, I mean, they also kind of like this a similar lifestyle. So
Okay. Oh, that's good. That's
hmm.
good. Mm, interesting. So, I was reading your website. It's been 20 plus years, I think, in sort of the spiritual space, I think is what I picked up on.
Hmm.
So you were not always spiritual, like
It's
where there's
hard
a
to say. I mean, I guess like I don't know. When I was 8 or 9 years old, I just wanted to play with toys. But like by the time I was like 10 to 12, I was really into otherworldly things. Like I would be envisioning other worlds a lot of the time, and creating a lot of these sort of like rich landscapes in my mind. And I was actually building a lot of video games when I was about 12 years old. I had a little editor I could use, and I could build worlds in video games. It was actually Doom at the time, Doom 2, and I would have a WAD editor for Doom 2, so I could literally take Doom, I could reskin it, and I could build my own worlds. And it was a little really fun thing I used to just do a lot of the time. I built like a Dairy Queen on a mountain Doom. I built like a castle in the forest. But I guess it was at that time it was more about creativity. And then when I was about 19 and I met a friend who had returned from the West Coast, I was living in Ontario at that point, and he had been living in the forests of Tofino and gone full hippie. And he offered me some psilocybin, and it opened my world up. And I'm like, oh wow, this is possible. This is really really cool. I love this, and like I want to reconnect back to some of these natural capabilities of the human being. So my first order of business was shamanism, and so I read all the Carlos Castaneda books. I tried all sorts of plant medicines, and then I studied shamanism for what it was without the drugs. And that was very important because it brought me to an understanding of the fundamental human capability that we possess of voyaging and journeying on the internal planes to ascertain information. Now, when you're doing that, you can actually turn on different functions of your genetic expression that then turn on abilities like intuition, clairvoyance, clairaudience, being able to see things, premonitions, being able to kind of predict future outcomes based on different probabilities, or basically what we would call ESP, extrasensory perception, in human abilities. And from there, it kind of snowballed into me meeting a number of mentors that I then studied under for 18 years in different capacities. And some very interesting things ensued, things that probably would be outside of people's normal scope of reality.
Mhm. Mhm. Hmm. Um, so Trifecta and Octave Leap. Octave Leap is your company. Trifecta is the product, the offering, I guess.
Yeah, Trifecta is a synthesis of human design gene keys and astrology, evolutionary astrology. And so they kind of fit hand in glove. And I prefer to use a sidereal model that's more astronomically based than astrologically based. And this is what ruffles a lot of feathers because most people, especially in the human design community, do not like sidereal. They don't think it's human design. It's not by the book. Whereas human design is based on astrology, and astrology, most astrological systems were sidereal, except for the Western system, which arose out of Babylon, later adopted in Egypt and Greece, that was based on the seasons of the year. So it was never based on calculations based on where stars and or planets and constellations were. It was always based on where the sun rose on the spring equinox. That was the starting point for the zodiac. So it has no relation to what we actually see in space. Instead, it ties us to the precession of the equinoxes, which is influenced by the moon. The moon is an artificial satellite. And basically, it's the thing that keeps the entire matrix up and running.
Mhm.
It's great for describing the things that happen in the ordinary world and the things that are bought into the matrix. And the more that you buy into that, the more that you create this identity that isn't quite in alignment with reality. Now, human design is quite interesting because Ra Uru, who took a different perspective. He said, this is the way you decondition yourself from Maya. So he was legitimately saying, I'm going to use tropical astrology because when I use that, we can see the areas where people are conditioned and where we can decondition from. Now, the problem with this is when it gets conflated with, oh, I am this way. I am a 1-3 projector, and this is my strategy and authority. It's like, well, if this is a deconditioning tool, why are you defining yourself by a zodiac, which literally is putting you into a box? And so with Trifecta, I said, if we retool this thing, and I don't use the body graph so much, but I use the gates and I use the placements and I use the, having a design and personality, and the profiling. But when we, set it against the sidereal datum, it actually makes a lot more sense for people. And it actually opens up a lot of different pathways. I just had a reading with a woman recently who had been seeing this very famous Vedic astrologer and then had a reading with me. And the difference was that the Vedic astrologer said, don't go to these places. They're very bad for you. It will never work out. You'll have misfortune. And she came to me for a second opinion. And she's like, that was the greatest reading I've had, because I don't pigeonhole people. I simply tell them about the potential expression of different places, of different elements in their chart. And I will never, ever tell a person like, you're doomed. That's the worst thing you could say to anyone. When doctors say that to you, that affects the placebo effect, and you go around and you recreate a very big limiting belief about yourself.
Hmm.
So that's the beauty of tying in the gene keys. Is the gene keys give you a range of expression, and Ra kind of talks about it with the not self variant versus the self variant for each gate. So there's sort of an imbalance and a balanced expression, but you can go further with that. And part of what I'm working on now with Trifecta is actually linking it with something like spiral dynamics, where there's actually more gradations than 3. So you can actually have 7 different stages, because these are the stages of ego development in ego transcendence, that are for each placement. And so when you look at it from that lens, you begin to assess yourself. It's like, where am I at in my maturity level? We don't think about this term. We think of, where am I at with my abilities? Where am I at with my sexiness? Whatever it is that people normally think. But I ask the question, like, where am I at with my maturity with something? Because really, especially when you're my age and you're over the age of 40, you want things that are more long term.
Hmm.
And you want to get to the bottom of things. You don't want to be going around on, carousel rides for the rest of your life.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Um, my I've been calling her my spiritual teacher is Dr. Eleanor Haspel Portner. She worked with Ra to he hired her and her husband to scientifically validate the human design system,
Right.
and she didn't. Like she was like, this doesn't line up, and that's
Hmm.
kind of where they broke. Um, I don't. Astrology is definitely my weak point, but an area that I want to spend more time
Hmm.
in. Believe she takes she takes the same approaches as you're taking as far as
Hmm.
the type, and she's made many comments that when she worked with Ra, he kept telling her to like throw away her astrology books. Like you don't need that. My system's complete. And that was a big part of why.
He kept telling her this.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So it's just interesting that because her background is as a sex therapist, child development, like basically, and actually her background, she was already familiar with the I Ching and Kabbalah and the, like astrology. So she was when she found Ra in design, or I guess he found her.
Hmm.
She had enough background to ask the right questions, and ultimately
Hmm.
just didn't stay the course. So
Hmm.
so it's pretty interesting. I even how I found her. Don't entirely remember exactly the course of events, but I just remember there was something off about design. There was something off about the body graph, and I found an old article, and it was talking about Chetan Parkin being sued by Jovian over copyright of the body graph and stuff. So Eleanor actually owns the copyright to the original body graph, and it's funny how she describes it. Is that at the time everybody was just wearing jeans and flip-flops, and she was the only person wearing a business suit, and they were there to create a business. So she went through the motions of copywriting the images and stuff. So she actually owns the copyright to the body graph, which is why the human design one is distorted. Like it's they actually had to distort it because they didn't own the rights to it. So
Wow.
yeah, so it's a whole fascinating thing when you start thinking about the distortion.
Hmm.
And so yeah, thought I'd mention that just partly because I was yeah, I don't know why. It's an area that I've somehow found myself in, and I describe myself as a drummer and a pickleball player, and I'm into technology. Like this has not been something that I've actively pursued. It just keeps finding me, if that makes sense. So,
Hmm.
so it's interesting. Um, yeah, and the fact that there's something about Salt Spring, man. Something about the island here. There's something in the water. There's something in the air. So
Yeah,
what
I was a geologist for hydrogeologist actually. Um,
hydrogeologist?
Hydro, water,
Okay.
groundwater. And through my training, what I noticed was that different geological formations um, influence the water piezoelectrically and with the dissolution of various mineral compounds, and your biological factors and your oxygen reduction potential. Just the sciencey stuff. Um, but it influences groundwater, and then people drink the water. And we use water; we don't even notice it. We shower in it, like it's just absorbing into us. And water carries information. So water carries the information of the rocks that underlay us. And so I could look at a geological map and I could tell you a lot about an area. And I'll give you a couple examples in Canada. Nova Scotia used to be a piece of Africa that basically migrated its way over here. And it was also the first black colony with the Underground Railroad back in the day. So, how they knew to end up in Nova Scotia, which is not close to a border, beats me, but they found their way there because it was part of the continent which, presumably these people came from back in the days. There's an affinity. Similarly, Vancouver is at the edge of a floodplain. It's the end of the Fraser River, and Vancouver is one of the most identityless transient cities you can find in this country. You know, it's almost like it's funny. Whenever I go to Vancouver, it's like nobody knows why they're here. That's my overall feeling with the city, and it's very true. It looks like everything's kind of built on top of each other. It's very expensive, but everything's built on top of each other. There's no clear order or direction because it's built on the floodplain. It's where you know geological material is carried for thousands of kilometers and distributed before it ends up in the ocean. So it's going to be a mixed bag. Similarly, a place like near Smithers, Hazelton, BC, has this real epicenter of I think it's quartz. I think it's quartzite. I can't remember exactly, but I remember looking at this about 20 years ago. And I noticed that everybody there was like lit up and they were very powerfully charged. Like there was a vibration to the place. Well, Salt Spring actually is similar. Salt Spring's underlain by rose quartz in the southern part of the island and quartz in the southern part of the island and rose quartz in the northern part of the island. I did my geological field school here. Um, I might not even have that wrong. I can't remember. It's one of the two, but it's a lot of quartz and a lot of rose quartz. And quartz is one of the most piezoelectric, crystals out there, meaning that it gives off sort of this pulse. I mean, that's why we use it in watches and etc. And therefore, it's constantly broadcasting this signal and amplifying this signal. And when you then introduce something like rose quartz into the mix, rose quartz has its own qualities that then get amplified. So the geological underpinning of the island mixed with the groundwater, which is the vehicle for this into human consciousness, will attract a sort of level of consciousness. It's just the way it goes. So if you want to understand the relationships between people and water, another great example is Mount Shasta in California. It's a spiritual hotspot. Very high frequency. They say it's like the gate to Lemuria. And in truth, if you go to Mount Shasta, where does the water come from? Very deep in the ground. It forms the headwaters of the Sacramento River. And basically, water comes gushing up at about 500 gallons a minute. You can go right in the city park, and you can fill up your 18 liters of the most pristine, volcanically filtered water. Now, what do you think you're drinking? You're drinking very, very high consciousness water. at that point. So the connection between land and water and human consciousness, um, I'd love to have more time to study that, but I already have, and my results were quite astonishing, to be honest.
Hmm. Yeah, water is an interesting theme for me. Um, it's interesting. My very first plant medicine experience, sort of through a shamanic weekend. This is 4 years ago, so I'd never tried anything like that prior.
Mhm,
The very first sort of trauma that came up was why I was dehydrated all the time, and it was just a trauma as a kid around water. But it
mhm,
got me very curious about it because I had never really thought about it before.
mhm.
The last couple of years, a couple of things have it's like patterns that reappear. So
Yeah.
was in a course once, and I ended up having a side chat with a woman there, and I can't remember what we were talking about. But
Mhm,
she said, "Before we go, I need to tell you you should go look up teal swan." And I was like, "Hmm, okay." And then I found out who she was, and very interesting lady.
mhm,
But I never understood why she was directing me to her until there was one day where Teal said, "It's very important to drink water from your birthplace. Like, go back and drink water from there." And I don't remember what the explanation was, but for whatever reason, I was just like, dog on a bone. I need to do this. So I made sure the next time I went back to Toronto, I was born in North York,
mhm,
which is now amalgamated into Toronto. I just was pounding back local water. And there was something going on for me. That led me to another conversation that I had with Barbara Ditlow. So she's a human design person that's been around for about in it for about 30 years, and I won a reading with her, and it was a fantastic conversation. We ended up talking about whiskey, and I was talking about alcoholism and struggles with alcohol,
mhm,
and but she correlated it to the fact that I'm like my family heritage is all Glasgow and Liverpool, and so,
mhm,
effectively my body is kind of originated from there, and it sent me down a whole path where like the only drink, like if I allow myself to have a drink, I'm getting something from the lowlands region of Scotland, so near Fife or near St Andrews, basically.
mhm,
So one of those is Auchentoshan, and so,
mm,
and there's something about when I have Akantoshan over something else, it's
mhm,
like the spirit flows through me. It's a spirit. A spirit like alcohol is a spirit. It can give you spirit. It can take it away, right? How you
mhm,
use it. But I've been actually very particular about having water from effectively my father's birthplace. And,
mhm,
I get it through this distilled whiskey, but so it's much more tasty and enjoyable. But I found myself drawn to that. So to the point too where this is a bit maybe absurd, but like I'm not really a waffles or pancake guy, but I sure like me some syrup, and the syrup is maple syrup from Ontario. It's like there's some water in that, and it's like my that seems to soothe my body. So there is something about that water element that I'm still exploring, but it's how I stumbled across that still continues to surprise me.
mhm.
There's something about water. Water certainly carries energy or data, maybe. Uh,
Yeah, information, data.
yeah. Um, as well, like, when I went to the Human Design Conference in Santa Fe last September, and I'm going to this place called Star Dreaming. It's a really neat property about 40 minutes out from where everything was happening there. And this guy's built all these portals that you can stand in, and he's got this room with all these crystal skulls, and it's a meditation room. And it was just a far out experience. They also had a well there that went down, I think, 1,400 feet. So like the water coming out of this well went like way deep. And I'm not a guy that likes to drink water. Like to me, it's a chore still. It's not. I generally seem to prefer being dehydrated actually, but the water there, I was taking water bottles there and topping it up and actually
Mhm.
onto it. Couldn't really tell you why. It might have been
Yeah.
the mystique of it, but for
Mhm,
whatever reason, I was like, I was pounding it back with ease.
mhm,
Almost like maybe my body knew it needed that water and not something else. I don't want to overthink it, but
mm.
you know, yeah, interesting. So It's the water that drew you to Salt Spring Island?
No, it's the land, but the water is the vehicle for how the geology translates into human consciousness because we're drinking it and bathing in it and it's showing up, watering our lawns with it. Can't escape it, raining on us.
Mm.
No, I mean, it was the experience I had in Salt Spring, came to visit and, yeah, just got a really good feel for the entire land. And then I checked my astrocartography and it was bam smack on my sun line. So East Souk, where I used to live, was near it. And I was like, oh, great. I found my sun IC line, which is a very fortuitous place to make a home
Mm.
in astrology. And then Salt Spring's even closer. So it was even more of a refinement. Now it was funny because the whole East Souk story was just like, literally a friend of a friend when we were in South Africa showed us a picture of this place, and it was like a couple things around there. It was like the Sea Chest coffee place, and it looked beautiful. It was like really cutesy, and then the pictures of the nature, and I'm like, wow, this place is just next level nature, but it's very isolated. And it was 40 minutes to anything,
Mhm.
and so it was kind of felt like The Shining after a while.
Yeah. Okay. But it got you close enough that you then it took you to Salt Spring effect.
Yeah, and I mean that's the other thing too is I do a lot of these astrocartography readings for people, and I just did one today. And people obviously want to know where they live, and they think the line is going to be their savior, right? They think, okay, as long as I'm on this line, what's the best line for me? And is this line going to save me? And it's like, well, we're more complex than that. Like, what do you want in life? And
Hmm.
then I'll help you to find a region that can supply that. But, what if your line runs through like Death Valley? You can't live there.
Hmm.
But then another part of the line might go through, I don't know, like you know, Kelowna or something like that. Okay, you can live in Kelowna, and maybe you would like to live in Kelowna, but do you want to live there? Is it a nice culture for you? I personally do not want to live there.
Hmm.
That's not a place that I would go to. Even if I had a good line there, um, I would probably choose somewhere else on or near that line. And so, just because you have to think of the local environment whenever you're doing anything. It's like, what do you actually need for amenities? What do you need for people? The level of consciousness of Souk and Langford, very different than Salt Spring Island.
Hmm.
Salt Spring Island, it doesn't feel like it follows the normal rules of Canada.
No.
You know?
Well, there's a little more like I think a lot of peace loving folks initially. Um, I mean, it's funny, but like around here when they have the Salt Spring fairs here, it's lots of homemade soaps and like people providing for themselves.
Yes.
And right, you're on an island off of a bigger island. So like if you need to go anywhere, it's a bit of effort. So it's a choice to be there. You're probably much more reliant on yourself, which is also probably a good thing. So yeah, interesting. Hmm. Where does my brain want to go? Oh, it's just gone quiet. um, you mentioned when we spoke before around, and it was around design. You'd mentioned the Black Book. I actually don't have much familiarity with it at all. I've always heard about this. Is that official? Like, was that sort of the initial revelation before Raw was looking to make a lot of money?
Yeah.
Okay.
1992 was when it got released.
Okay.
It
Yeah,
was
I've
the
never actually
purity
seen
of the Black Book. So, you ever played Dungeons and Dragons?
it. Not really. I had
You
friends
ever?
that did,
Okay.
so
If you have friends that do, there's a term in Dungeons and Dragons we use called book glut. And it was particularly notable in the earlier editions where they were running a business. And in order to run a business, you need to keep people buying things. And you could either get new customers or you could sell new things to old customers. It's much easier to sell new things to old customers than it is to get new customers.
mhm.
It just costs more money. So back in those days, the Dungeons and Dragons pool was small, and the internet wasn't a thing. So what they would do is they would release new books with new rules, and the game just got more and more complicated, basically, with all these things. So you'd be very specialized, and that's the exact same thing that happened to human design, right? When Ross said, I'm going to make money off of this. This is going to be big. And he, I listened to him in his 64 ways of money in that thing. He says it like he's a funny guy, and he just says it like it is. And he just goes to them. He's like, once I've got you, he's like, you Ajna people, with an open Ajna center, you just want to know, and I've got something to sell you. Like that was sort of his attitude. And so he just kept making things. And I'm assuming, he's just sitting back and sort of ideating. He's like, yeah, what about if I did this? And the problem with that is if it's done for the intention of, revenue, you don't realize the implications it's going to have. And he's gone now, so he can't set the record straight. And no one can. Like, there's no singular authority. Jovian tries to be this in human design, but a lot of people, especially like the people I see on the internet, they don't give a rat's ass about Jovian. Right? Jovian to them seems like an old staunchy, like the bureaucracy of human design. So you don't really have an authority, but you have this very complicated system that people are told needs to be complicated. And so they've gone so deep into it. And this is where it's screwing people up, because people get so in their heads about human design. And it's just honestly, I don't think it's healthy. The way that people sometimes get so into these intricate nuances of human design. Like they get obsessed with things, and it ends up sounding like a cult sometimes. And I'm not saying everyone. There's a lot of great uses for it, and the mechanics of it are beautiful. But I'm talking about what the actual movement has become behind it. And that's the thing that I struggle with. Like when people introduce themselves and go, "Hi, I'm a 5/1 projector. What are you?" And I'm like, I'm Dave. Like I don't do that. I don't play this game.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, well, I'm going to wait for the invitation." I'm like, why? Like, why can't we have a conversation? Like you've molded your psychology and your entire way of being around an external system now that was made for questionable reasons past a certain point.
Yeah. Just to quote or parrot what Eleanor's been saying, like, it's very disempowering actually at a certain point, and it's not heart centered.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's that's the thing. And then they go around and they attack sidereal systems. They attack the gene keys. They diss Richard Rudd, and it's just like, do you guys not see it anymore? It's like you've literally just you took a good idea and you've used it to become another cult, and now you've become tribal. And I mean, that's the whole point of human design, is to stop being tribal. One thing that I find fascinating is that the global consciousness cycles, he stumbled upon something that he didn't even go into in detail, and I figured out so much more on this. I made that 2027 video. Have you seen that one I did on YouTube?
I think so, but yeah.
Okay, I kind of introduced the concept because this is part of evolutionary astrology that I love, is where the sun rises on the spring equinox defines the background frequency of human consciousness. So in astrology, you can map the age of Taurus was when we discovered agriculture and we worshiped, the cow statue, and there was the golden calf. It was Taurus time for the humanity. Then came the age of Aries, where now you have the movie 300 basically for 2,000 years. It's just armies, walls of men bashing into each other in the Middle East. The Ramses dynasty just like clearing out all the spirituality of Egypt and saying, "Get me the chariots, we're going to war, and we're just going to kill and conquer." And that was the right thing. Like, might is right for humanity for 2,000 years. And then after that, we enter the age of Pisces, which is religion and secrets and, the occult for 2,000 years rules. And now, of course, we're in the age of Aquarius, or entering that. And age Aquarius is all about technology. These are broad strokes, though, and we need a little bit more fine calibration. So what Ra did is he said, well, since the gates are basically smaller representations of these various signs, what if we looked at through the lens of the gate? And that's where he developed sort of the, um, he takes the incarnation cross of the actual thing, and then he uses the design incarnation cross too. So you get this image that's basically like an 8-armed cross. And that 8-armed cross, basically, each one of the points on there has a specific energetic signature. So depending on which gate on this wheel or this dial of human design it lands on, it's going to activate it. And so you can actually get a read of what the background frequency is. Now, with this, you have gates, but then you have lines. So each gate is active for 411 years, but each line is active for 58 years, basically, or something like that, 52 or something. And then I can't remember, but it's a small time period. And then you can go down to the color, base, and tone.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can literally get a reading for, a month or a year at what's the background frequency of this period of time. So right now we're closing out the main one right now is of course the shift from the cross of planning into the cross of the sleeping phoenix, right? So we're shifting out of the 40 into the 55, and we're going from 40.1 into 55.6 because it's a retrograde action. And this, if you really read this and you really understand the energy of these things, like this is the foundation of science, of society, of the community. And when all that COVID propaganda says you're not doing it for yourself, you're doing it for the collective, you're doing it for everybody. This is your duty to society. Well, when people did that and then they realized, hey, maybe I didn't do something that feels right, then they're like, what gives? Like, that used to be the thing we do, is we support the society, and that was rightful. Well, the problem is now with the sleeping phoenix, the 55-6 basically says, you are doing something for yourself. You're radically following your internal instructions. And, there's going to be, each one of you basically has the right instructions inside of you. And that's the whole basis of human design. And I think that part of it is really powerful, is it's the science of individuation.
Mm-hmm.
And if we take that and then we leave some of the book glut or the jargon, and we just focus on what does this tell me and how am I wired as a unique individual, and we go with that, we might find that that's what truth is, because truth shifts throughout the ages. And so a lot of people who look at old Hindu stuff or old Buddhist stuff, they're looking at where truth was 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to understand that any of these parables or axioms or ways of being, they need to be adapted for the time that they're in at all times. Otherwise, they're no longer truth. Mm-hmm. They were subjective truth from a period of time. And that's the beauty of Ayanamshas in sidereal astrology or sidereal human design, is where each Anamsha carries carries the signature of a particular period of history. So if you use it, it's like you're tuning into a facet of your multidimensional self at a different point in time. So if you track that Ayanamsha with NASA and you use the most accurate one to today's date, you're going to get that version of you in your body graph, in your chart, that is most relevant for today.
I hear a child.
Yeah.
Everything okay?
Yeah.
I never heard the word I am not. I am on.
Ayanamsha, you wouldn't hear it in tropical because it's not a thing. Because your Ayanamsha is basically, it's much simpler. Tropical is much simpler than sidereal, because tropical, you're always looking at March 21st, and that's the start of your zodiac. So they don't use Ayanamshas. Ayanamshas is a Sanskrit term that's used in sidereal systems that's basically recalculating for the precession of the equinoxes.
I mean, it's pretty clear that the world is shifting, and some of the sort of the February 15th, 2027, like things breaking down. It's clear that that's actually going on with the sidereal. Does that date shift? Does the energy shift? Is it still the same story?
It's a sidereal measurement. The global consciousness cycles are a sidereal measurement.
Okay.
And this is the thing, another incongruency with human design is, why does he go from a sidereal global consciousness cycle measurement into a tropical body graph? That doesn't make any sense. It's like apples to oranges.
Well, as I said, like Eleanor said it many times, he told her to throw away her astrology books. You don't need it. The system's it. Also, she described it as he wanted the profile was going to be a coffee table book. That was how he was going to make his millions, was profile, and that makes her crazy. She doesn't even want to talk about profile.
I
So,
don't get it. What do you mean?
well, just at the time, he came up with this profile concept and had her test it. Like she actually used her statistical background to effectively choose it, and she called it a statistical artifact. So you couldn't actually construct meaning from it. I will say that if I talk to someone about their profile and kind of go into that story, people feel heard and recognized. So like there's something thematic about it, but
Hmm.
there was nothing scientific about it.
Hmm.
So that's been an interesting path that it's been interesting for me. It's kind of lining up. Um, the other thing too is leaning into like the whole idea of incarnation cross really seemed to actually accelerate synchronicities for me or alignment. But since working with Eleanor, she uses something called patterns of orientation, because she uses like 8 imprints. It's not just 3. So she's got a 4 worlds model and then a series of imprinting. So 2 weeks before you're born, 2 weeks after, and it all lines up to various cultures and how they like human development as well. And those patterns of orientation have been, the more I've leaned into that, the more synchronicities, the more I the sense of self is comfortable. So it was interesting. Like I had to find human design and read up on my incarnation cross to find Eleanor, only to then have a reset and be like, oh, here's a different way to look at it.
Yeah.
And again, I wasn't. I still find it funny because this is not my background. I know nothing about astrology. I know nothing about. I just keep finding falling into it again and again and again. So
Hmm.
yeah. Hmm. So can you explain the significance of integrating human design gene keys and astrology in Trifecta?
Yeah. Takes care of the deficiencies in each of the three systems.
Okay.
So, astrology is very archetypal and it's loose. You can kind of go in many directions with it. You have 12 signs. And so there's quite a bit of leeway as to what each sign means. There's
Mm,
12 subdivisions of the one truth, which isn't very many. And it's a chromatic progression from Aries to Pisces. Um, so it's a little bit more open-ended, and you can get into more advanced forms of it where you're looking at degrees, and you're looking at decans, and you're looking at very specific placements in astrologies to get specific information. But overall, it's more vague. But it has some really good things like the aspects, the house system, the relationships, and what part of life do these show up in. Um, you know, the transits are all based on design, and gene keys are all based on astrology, by the way. Like they are hands down. You need astrology first, you need a zodiac first, you need to look at your ephemeris, and then you can calculate your design and your gene keys.
mhm,
Now, human design is very masculine, it's very structured, it's very orderly, it's very much tells you who you are and how you work.
mhm,
um, but it's almost like a machinery, right? And so with that, I find it can be very boxy. It can very much put you in a box, and it takes away the multidimensional nature of our reality, which allows us to actually shift into things beyond definitions. That's where the gene keys comes in. Because gene keys basically now places each gate from human design into a larger context of each gate having an expression on an unbroken spectrum, ranging from a shadow range to a gift range to a transcendental range. Now, that in itself is still very basic. If we want to be specific, we need to talk about all the different layers of human consciousness that exist within that. And so that's what I'm trying to develop right now, is a system basically that grades you on this vertical axis. Okay, so what I mean by that is AI could presumably take your human design and tell you the mechanics of how you work, but it tells you nothing about the level of consciousness from which you operate in these various aspects of life. It can't tell you, if you've got your head in the dirt, you're a TV watching, junk food eating, not going to get off the couch, play video games all the time, watch mainstream news, that level of living, or if you're going to be somebody who is very conscious of every action they take, very intentional with what they do, or a spiritual practitioner, or somebody who's going out to clubs and really into like the fashion scene or something like that. Like there's a wide variety of where consciousness can basically get to, and that is sort of like I see human design and a lot of astrology like this, and Gene Keys brings in this vertical axis now.
Mhm.
And so Gene Keys says, well, what level of consciousness are you operating from? And that is where it breaks Ra's declaration that there is no choice. Because there is choice, and the choice is to change your vantage point. When you change
Yeah.
your vantage point and you change the level of consciousness you're operating from, Saturn has a very different expression. A lot of people are scared of Saturn because Saturn is external law and limitation at the shadow level.
Mhm.
At the gift level, when evolutionary astrology calls this the consensus, the individuated, and the transpersonal, Saturn becomes your own inner discipline. That's a good thing, especially if you have a goal. Your inner discipline is going to move you towards that goal. The transcendental level, Saturn becomes natural law. So it becomes working with the actual laws of the universe, which again is a very beautiful thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I never really got on board the no choice thing. I've, part of me is just frustrated. It almost seemed like Ra wanted to fit it on a hat. So, like, how can I cram what Osho called choiceless consciousness and cram it into something that would embroider on a hat? And it's really limiting.
Yeah, I mean, he was borderline fashion designer, wasn't he?
Who, Ra?
Raw. Like I see all these talks with him, like with his own like custom clothing that had these like funny little slogans and monikers.
Well, I think it was like he needed to fit on a bumper sticker. Like, part of the thing that turned me off of Raw a lot was, I mean, maybe I just took it personally, but I heard him say generators are the stupidest people you'll ever meet in a
Yeah, I
meeting.
know. I've heard him say stuff like that before.
I was just like, "Fuck you, buddy." That was it. That was where I was like starting to look for alternatives. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I mean, there's much to say on that, and behavior, particularly by manifestors that use him as their guide, that
Yeah,
lack social skills or social intelligence because it's like a get out of jail card free.
that's
Um,
what I feel about all the types. By the way,
yeah.
is that they all have this sort of like, oh yeah, especially projectors.
Mhm.
Like there's a whole identity that goes with that.
Oh yeah, it's real. I mean, I've already had people cutting me off energetically, but like, I've been to these conferences and there's special projector only meetings and special discounts for projectors, right? And like, so there's a bunch of folks that I had met online I was looking to see in person, couldn't find them. They're always in their private discussions because they're here to save the world and save the rest of us, to guide us all. So talk about putting a lot of pressure on some people. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So I went the last 2 years. The first year I went, I mean, it was a year and a half ago. I was more caught up in it and still just kind of a fly on the wall. But last year, I really found myself just on the outskirts, just observing and listening to people saying, I'm late because I've got gate whatever, or I can't come to or I've got this gate, I can't do that, and it was just I was just like, it sounded so absurd.
This
Yeah.
is exactly what I'm referring to.
Hmm.
This is unhealthy.
Hmm.
This is literally imposing limiting beliefs upon ourselves and rejecting the fact that we're creator beings capable of anything.
Yeah.
Why people do this blows my mind, and I will never know why people insist. It's a very old way of operating. And what I notice is that it becomes a race to the bottom, where the lowest common denominator becomes sort of the um, community identity, you could say,
Mhm.
and also the community values and conduct. And so, yeah, of course, I get a lot of. I have one video where I'm telling the story of the voice, but then I like slip in the evolution of like human design into true cosmic human design, and I introduce trifecta. And some people love it. I mean, it's got 11,000 views now on YouTube. Some people love it, and then the purists, they hate it, and they let me know exactly what they think of that video, but they can't do anything. They can't take it down. They can only write their scathing reviews on my wall, and then hope I don't reply with something smartass. But like that's all they can do, and you know it's pretty funny to see this because I think people suffer as a result of the way that they conduct themselves like this.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's been I've experienced it firsthand. A whole bunch of people I was friends with, and now, I mean, it's not like they've cut me off, but I'm certainly. It's clear that uh, I'm a risk somehow by talking about alternatives of the past.
Hmm.
What's interesting is I have all sorts of people pinging me side notes saying, "Have you seen this? Have you seen that?" So I don't know if you're familiar with Zeno and Chitanyo, right? They were the two people that worked with Ra right in the beginning. So they were
Yeah.
the ones that extracted the revelation from Ra and put it into words and created the body graph because Ra wasn't actually capable of doing this, right? So he was basically talking to them. They were extracting it from them. So if you think about it, like pretty much everything from design was the three of them putting their heads together. One was the writer, one was the diagram drawer, or did the graphics, and then there was Ra speaking, I suppose. And so that's three different energies and filters and perspectives taking the revelation and manipulating it because you had to do something with it. You had to produce content, right? And I mean, even back to the whole body graph thing, like I think my understanding is the revelation itself can't be copyrighted, right? It's good for humanity. It's here for humanity. That was what was proven in court was that nobody owns the revelation.
And he wrote it in the black books too. In the black book as well, he said, "This is not copyrighted. Go
Yeah,
do with it what you want." And that's what gives us permission to play around with the experiment and to change it in different ways. Now, it's not human design anymore; it's something else, which is why I renamed it. But
mm,
it's part of that experiment that uses some of those mechanics, which I'm glad is open source.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, even he changed his tune towards the end as well. Of just it was his system, and there's rumors or not rumors, I suppose, but like emails that went out about a week before he died, where he was basically dissing everybody and saying they stole the system from him and stuff. And the only thing I could think of is that effectively his soul had left his body and he was just back to being a human and was just like pissed off before he passed.
Yeah.
Um, that's a whole interesting thing. Even again, having Eleanor as a someone to talk to, like Ra had predicted his own death, right? And that he was going to be shot and killed by a woman that he gave a reading to, and then he had a heart attack. So he wasn't quite as
No.
as he thought he was. So
No. It's an unusual way to die.
yeah, very
Especially
specific.
women with guns that come for readings in the self development world. Like that's a very very specific way to go.
Well, there's all sorts of stories about him. There was one, and I don't remember where I saw it or heard it, but like at one point he tried to destroy all the body graphs. I guess like all the evidence of it. He wanted it out, and then some women and children were coming towards his place and wanted readings. Like he was, people were ravenous for this information, and he like peed on them apparently, like to make them go away. He was so annoyed by these people. Like he was certainly an interesting character. So
Hmm.
that's true. So yeah, yeah, the whole thing's it's the disempowerment and the non-heart centeredness of it that has bothered me the most which is why I keep seeking elsewhere and looking for information. So, um, yeah, the have you ever? So you didn't look like you were familiar with Zeno, like you're not familiar with that name, because she actually created one of the first study guides for design early.
No, I'm not a human design guy. Like, I'm
Yeah.
just not. I mean, I was instructed by my own inner knowing to pick up certain things and learn certain things and package them in a certain way. And they went in that direction, and I presented what I did, and I moved on now. Like, I mostly work with this thing called quantum rebalancing, which is basically a way of correcting all of your 7 layers: your physical, your emotional, your mental, and then the 4 spiritual layers, you could say, of your being. And when you get that into balance, um, life just becomes easier. It becomes much more seamless. You don't have the same problems anymore. When your body can run energy, higher energy through it properly, you don't have to worry about supplements in the same way or medical conditions in the same way,
Mhm.
because everything's calibrated. And when there's an obstruction or blockage in one of these, especially the higher bodies, it creates very physical illness or problems in the lower bodies. Um, Now, health is also purposefulness. It's also how well resourced you are. And these things come into play, and you can kind of get a diagnosis from Trifecta. So, Trifecta for me is my medical diagnostic tool for your spiritual health. And then quantum rebalancing is the actual process for realigning it.
So, describe quantum rebalancing. Like, is it a series of intentions, exercises?
It's a scientific process. And can I share a screen here? Is that cool?
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I know you probably used Restream before, but it should be pretty obvious. It's a little monitor with a arrow pointing up there.
Yeah, let me just pull this up. So I'm going to relate this to the gene keys. The little thing with the arrow pointing, not the plus sign. Oh, there we go. Hmm. Yep. So
So I have to click a button here, I think.
there we go.
There we go. Got it.
Okay. So this here is the 7 density layers of our being. Now, some systems have more density layers and some systems have less. But effectively, we are very familiar with the physical, and our physical body is made of minerals, our emotional body is made of hormones, our mental body is made of electricity. Um, if you want to experience your mental body, for instance, just think of yourself on a beach right now with a coconut. It's a fresh coconut, just came down, and you're taking that sip through the straw, and that sweet, thick taste, creamy taste of coconut coming into your mouth. And all of a sudden, you'll notice you feel a little bit calmer. And the longer that you spend with something like that, you can recreate experiences, and the neuropeptides from your brain run through your nervous system, and they actually create the sensations in your body of warmth or coolness or whatever you're thinking of. So a lot of people who are looping stories, old stories in them, they're experiencing them, and that's actually affecting their emotional health, and that the physical body holds that. So whatever we're thinking basically becomes in physical form. Now, it doesn't stop there. The things we're thinking are influenced by our biophotonic level. And this is basically where the heart brain comes into play. So our heart is sort of this broadcaster of our aura. It's this toroidal field around us. It's measurable. There's a woman at the University of California. She ran a number of tests, and she could measure a person's aura and basically relate it to the level of consciousness. It's super cool. But this is basically your soul is how much you enjoy doing what you're doing. If you hate your life, you're going to have a deficiency in this body. If you're exerting yourself too much, you're going to have a deficiency in this body. If you're living for yourself, doing what you love, that's going to be a healthy body. The next level is this oversoul. And I was talking about it before, where you're connected with people. Well, you're literally connected with your family. And that's what family constellation work kind of proves this, that an imbalance in one member of the family will throw off the entire fascial network of the family. And this is because your DNA is sort of a recursively learning, living, liquid, crystalline solution that is very much in tune with certain harmonics of people out there. Human design would say that this is the electromagnetic bonds between people, but this is something deeper. This is why those bonds happen.
Mm.
The hologram layer is where your higher self lives, and this is the vision you have for your becoming based on your past. This is where the Akashic records live. And the quantum state is basically what they talk about in Buddhism of nothingness. That's the primordial field that we operate from. And so when your consciousness level is able to go up to the top, that's where you experience those transcendental qualities that they talk about in the gene keys. And that these here are where it sort of blends into the gift bandwidth. And if your consciousness can't get out of the physical, emotional, mental, you're effectively stuck in the shadow. And so this is also the layers that I'm developing with Trifecta. So each one of these corresponds to a different body. So the physical layer is people who live completely out of this layer almost have like an animalistic quality. It's like they just take what they want, just like, rah, they just go out and they take it. Or like, sometimes another example is like if you get very primitive people that go on tours, sometimes this happens where like, a country will go through a boom, and then like the people who used to work in the farms in the country would now have the opportunity to travel, and they go to like a Western country and they just like, take a crap in the middle of a mall, like that type of thing. It happens, believe it or not. It does happen. But it's this sort of way of operating that's very impulsive. And this one here is where, the emotional level is where you see this a lot in sort of countries that are run by theocracies, where people just basically are emotionally sort of repressed and they hold their emotions in and they just follow orders. That's when you can tell somebody's really at that level of consciousness. And then the mental level is where people become experts and they argue and they point fingers and they say their way is the best. And then there's a real gap that we have to cross into the actual gift frequency. And the soul is just where you become accepting of many ways and you're living out of the heart. And then the oversoul level is when you start to get sort of like abilities like the data streaming, and you start to tap into like, other worlds and realities and have transpersonal experiences. The avatar quality in that body holds literally your becoming, the imprint of who you are. And this is back to, that experience of bliss, of just pure bliss. And it's all made of different substrates along the way. And so with the work that I do is basically I first diagnose where a person's at with a certain part of their life, because actually every aspect of a person's chart, like from human design, is a different facet of life. So some people might be very good with their Mercury, for instance, or their intellect, but have a deficiency in their Venus, which is their love and the way that they attract things into their life. So they might be very smart and they might be very good at what they do and educated, but they have trouble attracting money. That's a common thing. And so there's a deficiency in that attraction mechanism. And so then I look at where the stuckness is, and I usually ask them a series of questions to figure out where their consciousness is limited. And based on that, we figure out, is it because it's repressed or it's reactive? And then from there, we balance that out, and then it takes care of itself. And it's as simple as that. And I'm effectively trying to make this a scientific process versus a woo-woo process. Like that's really my main intention here, because it's possible to get our screens the same size. Mine looks larger right now.
Yeah, I adjusted when you were sharing your thing. So
okay,
boop, there we go.
Yeah, so this, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to take what was typically energy healing or woo-woo and actually make it into a science, because let's face it, theoretical physicists and quantum mechanics has already sort of spoken into these things and said it's real. Dimensions 4 through 11 exist. They're just 150 millionth the size of a proton, and they're curled up into a ball in the middle of the proton, but we don't have anything small enough to measure them. However, these hold the blueprint for how the material dimensions of reality actually unfold.
Okay. Cool. What is rebalancing exact? Well, maybe not even.
Why use rebalancing versus healing? Because healing has this connotation of you've got to get somewhere or you've got to get back to somewhere. Rebalancing, on the other hand, assumes that you're already enlightened. You have an already present condition of enlightenment, and sometimes you'll hit it. Like the first time somebody does a plant medicine ceremony and they have a breakthrough, in that moment, they're awake. There's nothing wrong. There's nowhere else for them to go. They're there. They're at that place. Now, the thing is if they're not trained to keep that state in balance with the fluid contours of life, they're going to fall out of balance. And maybe they have habits that pull them out of balance more often than they keep them in balance. So the way that this works is saying that, if you get something right for, let's say, a couple of weeks and you're on track and then you fall off the wagon, you're not a fuck up. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just, you were in a situation where you couldn't keep your balance and you fell off. No problem. We rebalance that and we train you to stay in balance with the contours of life. And sometimes it's like a mechanical bull at a bar. It's like it's bucking and it's bronking. And it's how long can you stay on the thing for?
Hmm.
That's what life is sometimes. And if you're really good at riding and shifting with life and adaptable and malleable like that, you'll have no problems.
Hmm.
If you're stuck in certain ways, and this is the other thing too, is that already in present enlightenment, except you have crystallized obstructions somewhere in your psychology, your emotional body, or your field that is basically causing you to not perceive things correctly. They call it transference in human design. You don't perceive things correctly, and then you take an action that isn't going to bring about your desired outcome.
Hmm. Cool. How you doing for energy? I just looking at the time there.
All right.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay.
How much longer do you want to go for?
I usually clock in around an hour and a half, so we're getting
Perfect.
close.
Yeah, let's go for another 10 minutes.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Is there anything that you wish? How do I want to phrase that? Huh. Is there something that people should know that most people don't that you know that you wish they knew?
Mm, yeah. Um, I know a lot of things. I've studied a lot of things, and I've got a lot of information from tuning into different fields, you could say.
Hmm.
And because in my early life, I spent time getting educated, I have a good vocabulary for this, and I tend to find the right word for things. But when I describe what's actually the thing that's going to get people the furthest, it's a very simple process, and I have very crude language for it because I haven't developed a sophisticated language. But you plug yourself into yourself, and that's all you do. You don't channel other things. You don't end up going where you don't belong. You plug yourself into yourself,
Hmm.
right? So what I mean by that is you take your spiritual layers and you plug them into your physical body mind complex, and you ground that and you anchor that energy down. And you want to get those layers embodied first. You want to get your soul, your oversoul, your higher self, your quantum blissful nothingness state, and you want to bring it into the body. And when you do that, it rewires the whole body. Your organism operates differently. It takes care of itself. It doesn't allow bullshit in. You know what to do. You're in the flow. More synchronicities happen. Your abilities come online. People like you. You find those relationships that matter to you. And at the end of the day, that's what this is about. And you know what? You become uniquely individuated into the role that you're here to serve on this planet. You do not need to go around to gurus, I see people just cramming their heads with shit on Gaia TV and they don't even know what they're getting.
Hmm.
It's like just like taking a random USB sticks and plugging it into your computer that you got from the black market.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's true. I, for the most part, right or wrong, I don't watch TV. I've never been really into binge watching stuff, but I can devour a lot of YouTube on double speed. Like I'm always seeking stuff, and I found myself caught up in taking in tarot readers and stuff for a while, and that was it. It's great entertainment, and because it can, you'd be like, oh man, this is for me, and before you know it, you're lost in the soup. So that
Mm,
I've felt that pull before. Um, and so, yeah, it's fascinating. You really got to watch what information's coming in, how it's coming in. Yeah, it's absolutely, it's a hot mess out there.
yeah,
So, yeah. Hmm. Cool. Well, I mean, we're getting close here. And I know my wife wants to, she's got the car, so I need to ride home. But it was great chatting, man. And I might actually be over on Salt Spring in a few weeks. There's a fellow there, a musician, that's building a tiny house, and he was talking about giving me a tour of it. So
Very cool.
I'll ping you a note if you're interested in connecting. I'll buy a coffee or something. So,
Sounds
or
good.
okay, cool.
Yeah, the coffees are expensive here, about $7 a coffee.
Yeah,
They're all organic, fair trade.
yeah,
The going rate these days.
yeah. Do you make your own soap now, or are you going to just buy it from the locals? You should have plenty to.
No, but I buy it from the goat next door.
There you go.
Yeah, you get it directly from the goat. They just sprinkle some herbs on for you.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. Okay, man. Good chatting. I'm gonna hit the little button here to make it look all pro. Just hang out here for a second, and
Sure.
we'll wrap up.
I wouldn't want to be so squishy, squashy, wash your